One more would be great. I need a few just to give the guys an example. Give me one more would be great.
One more. Okay.
One more. We got plenty of time. It just doesn't matter. Okay. So has anybody not been around kind of this kind of data in the past? Is this kind of day one for some people, or have most of you had some kind of exposure to? Okay, great. I mean, we won't make it so much about this. We'll make it more about, obviously, just the way he likes to stand. So going back to in many ways, this is great, by the way. And I've actually told you nothing fair. Just said, do your thing. And we kind of really mentioned that a lot of what happens in transition really exploits that dominant position they stand in. So when you live like a lot of people in these kind of, you're given two legs for a reason, in a good way. You don't kind of use these things like little walking sticks. The minute we move in transition, it really deforms us more in a nice way. And this applies to me and everybody, so this isn't aimed at you in any way. How we just get pulled to those kind of dominant positions that we like to live in. I actually took this apart last night to tidy things up, and I wish I hadn't done it now. I need just to reset the thorax sensor, which is why it's a bit twisted, so I'll do that in a second. But quite evident how he likes to live very much in that very, a bit like the second example I showed this morning. If you can recall those two case studies we had on screen of the slightly older guy with the forward head, and the next person in that very kind of shifted position. That kind of right side of the pelvis elevates, that very short right side of his spine, which was the kind of second guy that we used in that example. And much of kind of what you do as well, and we'll kind of make this about the coaches in a second. Are you as coach? Great. So if you're happy sharing some feedback as well as far as maybe what you discussed with UC back in July perhaps, or a few weeks ago? 3 weeks ago, yeah. And then we can kind of just start in some ways, when you have someone, clearly a very good player, comes in, we kind of get this information. The information in many ways isn't really that important apart from, all data really does is allows a much more informed discussion. That really is the role of any, whether it be statistics or those that use things like ShotLink or Decade or whatever system you may use, or that does again, it just allows a really informed discussion now, kind of based on what we now know, how could we possibly help you resolve whatever questions you have? And it's still possibly my favorite question I always have when working with players. How can we help today? We have this information. How would you like to use it? And it was certainly something, an approach we took with the sessions that we did back in March with the national program. Whenever any player came in, whether it be the young ladies or the young guys, how do you want to use the information you have today? And I have to keep reminding myself that it's their session, not mine. We're here to help them, not vice versa. And I think we kind of get lost on that sometimes when using this information. It's about, look what I know, look what I have, and we kind of forget there's a player there that's had to go and play in the European Championships next week or the national championship it might be. So historically, what kind of movements can happen, in what areas have you kind of looked to improve and explore, and what issues has there been over life? Through the... Would you mind, sorry, would you mind just stand up and just show me? Yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah. That's a pretty good example. He knows you very well. You guys do get on great. But kind of go back to that kind of second case study, that the idea of what we discussed, homeostasis, regulation, almost the initial move we have. So I'm talking, apologies, my back's to you now, because it's about you. That first move that we have is almost the body's way of placing ourselves back to where it kind of sees the middle. But we all do. I mean, if you look at every single lady and gent in the audience, they've all sat. And even I get like this as the day evolves because I stand. So it gets all of us, it's not you. But an initial move then is, how do I put myself back over here when I inherently know I can live over here? So this is where I think, for example, like Mate, for example, becomes so important then. Just, I think, even an observation, just kind of, if you're able to, just stand by the ball and look at the empty chair for me, just kind of like you're on parade in the army. I know you're doing your military service currently. But just how kind of up he lives around that left shoulder. And then if you wouldn't mind looking at me, go back to the very first slide we showed this morning about the X-ray in the chair and are we evolving or devolving as humans, and then the idea of the forward head. That, like most of us, you're great, by the way, at this, so I really should be paying you for this. This is actually very, very good. Just the frame that he currently has. And I think the key word there is currently, not forever. It's just where you're at in life today. This stuff can be resolved through, obviously, the good work you'll do with the guys, without too much stress. How do I get here from here? So the idea that the brain is doing way before it does. The brain is kind of mapping movement way in advance of you and I actually doing this. So it knows, okay, if that head's a bit like this and that kind of shoulder's a bit like that, and I live over here, that kind of works. So I'd be very curious around, and I think you and I even discussed this back in March. Yeah, I'm glad you listened. And I'd be very curious, and I know you've been busy with obviously the military stuff, which is different. Just by when we get him back into that middle again, the idea of the kind of the more space across that rib cage, the more length through the neck, getting that lower limb, pelvis, all aligned pretty much where, say, Mate would go. That's a pretty good place to be. But then how he then starts to move, you're absolutely right by you. So we can certainly look at all the kind of 3D stuff through here later on. I think a lot of what I see through here is absolutely what happens. But again, it's understanding why he moves that way. So even going back to some areas that we may even look at blind in advance of tomorrow. So here's a good one for we can look at. So most of you would have probably been around the concept of like the kinematic sequence as it's known, or the segment interaction as it's more accurately known. If most of you had some exposure to that, you really look at how valuable is that stuff and really how influential movement is that. You actually look at it in very playful language. So apologies for displaying lots of data. The kind of second column in from the left, the bottom two, you've got something called transition order and peak order. That really is a slightly kind of more informal way of just displaying those kinematic values. The idea of kind of pelvis, thorax, arms, hands, which some systems don't use, which always surprises me, and club. So how well do those segments move in order? Beautiful. So does it really reveal accurately how someone moves? No. All it really reveals is the order those segments achieve peak speed in. How realistic that stuff is to golf and how helpful it's to golf when we have someone, bless him in a good way, it kind of lives like this. I know how I would prioritize things. So certainly in some environments, you'd say, leave this guy alone, everything sequences beautifully. Yeah. How he produces that sequence, so it's a much bigger discussion for me. And I'm not devaluing that. It's very important. Within physiology, where a lot of this stuff comes from, it's very important. The idea of proximal, distal sequencing, very important. But I was talking to David earlier on, and you've got to kind of live in those kind of two worlds, the idealistic view versus the pragmatic view. So the idealism of this wonderful romantic planet versus the reality of how it works. It's almost that kind of, what's more important now, the idealistic kinematic values or the pragmatic value? How do we really improve you as a player? Which goes back to obviously where I was a coach. So for me, I think certainly in this case, I would sooner have someone stand so much better, certainly move so much better with a slightly kind of messy sequence than someone that currently lives. Again, this is all, so don't get stressed about this. This is pretty standard stuff. Someone that lives in that very adaptive position, and clearly I think that's some wonderful areas it can be improved by you guys, but produces good values. And it really comes back to some of those sequencing values now, that what they don't tell you is actually how frequent the player produces that sequence. So you may get this kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sequence, yes, but how often, with what club, with what shot shape, and in what environment? That's the bits they often get missed out. So how reoccurring is that sequence? Probably, even guys that I know got great sequencing might only do it probably 10% of the time. So I'd be very curious in a great way that, some of these philosophies and approaches, I think coaches have been really sold. But I just don't see how relevant it really is when we clearly have some other priorities, certainly with kind of Mate and the other trainers are, in Finland, for example, just to really get you away from that position. So hopefully it really kind of goes back to that kind of second study that we did today, that often the very first movement you see, it is how we put ourselves back in that, what we perceive to be that kind of neutral position. Any history of aches and pains, or ever hit balls and gone? So there is a history then. 6 years is not ancient. That's ancient years are like billions of years ago, but not in recent times. Can I ask what happened 6 years ago? Okay, the caveman.
So I played on a hard course.
Yeah.
I tried doing this.
Yeah.
I think that's my theory on it. That
Yeah.
it was so.
You know.
Here then.
Yeah.
Not now, but
Oh, you do.
then. And doing this with reasonably high club speed isn't good for your.
Yeah, that's okay.
Area, I don't know what to call it.
Yeah, that upper spine area. So. Yeah, actually moved pretty well through there, so, okay. Mate, have you spent any time with this young man, or what sort of stuff normally comes up? Yeah. You can undo your laces one day, yeah. 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 So he kind of sits. How does he sit through his feet? So he pronates in and inverts inwards, yeah. Kind of lives all a bit. Yeah. Okay. I mean, should we do some stuff now? Are you happy having a play? You don't have to. I will think less of you. No, I'm only kidding. You don't have to. It's whether you guys are comfortable doing this. So don't let me. You must decide. Let's do it properly and actually look at, I think, how we could help. So let's do it in a realistic way. Because I would kind of take, if you kind of, again, you look at it, certainly in this environment today, for sure we can improve how he moves, absolutely right. You can resolve all this stuff without too much stress. That's not particularly challenging. Whether you'd really resolve the issues as to why he moves that way, again, I think possibly not. That's why I think you'll get, I'm sure in the next 3 people that come in, someone is just very concept-based, very perception-based. It's just their awareness of movement. And then we can really play with those guys. May even be this young lady who's coming in now, perhaps. I think certainly with this young man, it's very much anatomically just how he stands is probably where we got to start with you. But you kind of know that stuff, so we'll let Matt in. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We can look at that in a different way. Okay, let's get you, in that case, let's get you disconnected, and we'll have a play with some bits. Just kind of play with some foot stuff like Mate said. And so the reference I gave the kind of guys earlier was that it's almost like we got kind of 3, like a little tripod, the feet. The thing that the black device is standing behind him. So we've got kind of 3 pressure points on the foot. Kind of that part of the big toe, little toe in the middle of the ankle. So just kind of walk your feet out a little bit more for me. So a little wider on your feet. That's fine. As you bend into start position, can you just establish equal pressure through? Take your time. I mean, we've got plenty of time today. So as you bend into that start position, at the moment, just take some, whatever time you need. You're in a rush, in a good way. Just establish those 3 points on those feet. Good.
Very good now.
Different?
It is different. I've got to stand like this.
Yeah.
It's like this. It's a
Yeah.
bit different, but it doesn't. It feels big in the when you're in the movie.
Yeah.
It feels a lot different, but it's not a big move.
Yeah. I mean, it's just how people scale scale and adjustment. And some guys go, that's no great stress. And there's some people where that is so different. And it really goes back to lots we'll discuss tomorrow morning around those kind of reference systems that we use that I mentioned at the start of the morning. There's the two biggest reasons why we do most things in golf are anatomy and memory. So the historical memories we have, that if you've lived in that position since even kind of teenage years perhaps, and so that all of your memories are based around living that way, what you and I could perceive as a minor adjustment can be to the player that's very different. So it just comes back to that reference system that we have. So that's always the kind of first question you share with guys. What are you referencing that against? Oh, I've done this since. Okay, so you kind of know them by the words. And when you actually listen to the words that people use, which we'll spend much time on tomorrow, the words we use reflect our beliefs in life. So if you listen to the words that people actually use, it really tells you much about the beliefs that they have around what they perceive to be true, what they perceive to be of value, and what they think of minimal value. So we'll listen to this very carefully, perhaps, when we do the session tomorrow afternoon, perhaps. Okay, so back into that kind of tripod position for me. In fact, my mistake. Just stand up nice and tall for me. So, without kind of elevating the rib cage back, can you just kind of walk the shoulder blades almost around the rib cage, but without really elevating that rib cage there? Almost to give yourself that wonderful kind of width in space. Pretty good, good. So a little way of doing this then in a slightly more playful way. Just so both hands and arms, just kind of reach them out for me, good. So without lifting the shoulders up, so keeping the kind of neck nice and long. Can you almost touch that chap there and that gent there for me? Almost can you reach out like you've been really pulled in both directions, like a tug of war rope. Do you get tug of war in Finland? You are the rope in this case. For a good kind of 10, 15 seconds, keeping those tripods for me, good. So long neck, so as you point your nose forwards, be nice and tall for me. Good boy, good. Really reach out. We're going to go for a coffee now. Don't move, and we'll be back in, what time sandwiches? Okay, so keeping that lovely, keep the left hand up for me. Keeping that, don't start to kind of drop down, good. As you bend forwards, keeping that tripod position in both feet, keeping those hands and arms really kind of almost like you're touching this gent and this gent here. Bend into your start position for me. Just about there and stop. So kind of let gravity win now. Just kind of watch me let the arms drop with gravity. Place your hands together. Maybe just come up a fraction taller. Good. Different? In what way? Through where? Yeah? Good. Yeah, no. But then why would it be obvious? Yeah, but don't devalue it. So let's attach some value to something. Good. Okay, so this kind of goes to that once again. So I'll be very curious just by standing better. I mean, little things that maybe you guys can use perhaps when you're back at your facility. The idea of wide rib cages, long necks, little tripod feet. And now obviously Matteo would do this in a much more precise way through the work that he does, but more from a coaching kind of, again, reference again that perhaps you can play with. I think, I say someone like you, I mean that in the most polite way. That sounds a bit rude, that. I think with someone like you in a great way, he'll start to move beautifully when he's allowed to. I think just the way that he currently stands, which is probably why he produces the movements that he does, which is pretty good, by the way. I think a lot of the slightly kind of niggly moves he has will just start to dissolve over time. I think all the adaptations that you see are his way of making that kind of existing start position work. Okay, so kind of reach out again for me. So point your nose forwards, nice and tall for me. Good. So have the tripod feet, so equal pressure through those connection points on both feet. Once you've kind of lived there, you actually got a pretty good frame there. He just lives in that very kind of, but don't we all? I mean, who am I to judge? That's what we all do, so it's just what he does. Keeping that lovely kind of wide rib cage. And I'll give you a different way of doing this perhaps as well in a second. Being very aware as you bend forwards, keeping the connection through those 3 points. Just let the arms drop with gravity once you've established that start position. So you can bend forward. Sorry, yeah, my mistake. Good. Let the arms just drop with gravity. Place your hands together. Just kind of live there for maybe 5, 10, 15 seconds. And as and when you're comfortable, just feed back to the guys in the room what may be different.
It's the same thing. I feel
Yeah.
more open.
Good.
So
Good.
maybe I think it would help if I wouldn't do this so much. I did more like this.
Yeah.
Which is what we're working on with Yannick.
Yeah. Good. Now you just start to join the dots now, so yeah, absolutely right. You're one ahead of me, but in a good way. Different visibly to look at. I think most of us hopefully would say very from where he was, pretty evident that start position. So I mean, just using kind of very playful ways of doing this, are more coaching-based commands rather than physiotherapy-based ones. Another way you can use thumbs under your armpits and then fingers. Let me come around here so you can all see. And then fingers as best you can on your rib cage there, without lifting backwards. So it absolutely isn't kind of extending the spine in that way. Can you almost lift your rib cage up and then let the shoulder blades just kind of slide down the back of the rib cage? As you kind of pick yourself off the floor, just let your shoulder blades drop down. So you've got that lovely long neck, kind of nose forwards again. Good. So really keeping that rib cage almost like you're lifting yourself off the floor in some ways. Into your start position for me. Again, just let the arms drop with gravity. Place your hands together for me. Again, different. Good. Yeah, no. It kind of goes back to what we were saying. I mean, it's finding what they connect to. That some guys go, I just don't get that one. The idea it's the right information, perhaps one he just doesn't connect with. So really, I guess all you ever try and establish is to find out what they do respond to and what they don't respond to. Because this really is the basis of movement now. You really have two types of humans. You have what you call responders and non-responders. So really much of your role within developing players is to figure out what they do respond to and what they don't respond to. And actually knowing what doesn't work is actually more helpful sometimes than what does work. So it comes back to who decides it's a good drill. We have. Well, they decide that, not me. Who decides if it's a good exercise? But where these concepts come from, it's a great exercise, this. Well, clearly not, because he didn't get it, did he? So it can't be that good. But so it's finding out what they connect to and what they don't connect to, or what they respond and don't respond to. Okay, so let's just kind of expand on that for you now. So with the awareness you now have, you can either go through your little drills that you've used or just the concepts you now have. Just come and pop yourself into that start position. But on this occasion now, pop your hands and arms across that rib cage. So bend into setup for me. So good connection through both feet. And now hands and arms across rib cage for me. Good. So then, it's an adjustment. Put your right hand on your belly button. Good. Being very active in that left hand. Just glide the rib cage around the spine for me. Good. So remain looking down at where you perceive the ball to be. So back into your start position. So come back to setup for me. Kind of look down at where the ball would be. So being really active in that left hand. Just glide that rib cage around the spine. Yeah, just to where you feel top of backswing could be. And just do that 2 or 3 times for me. So on this next one, when you feel you just get to that little kind of sticky point where you go, okay, that's kind of, let the rib cage then just pull the pelvis into rotation. So let the rib cage glide the pelvis into rotation. Good. So you may, for those that are really quite away, it gets a bit kind of dominant that way. So going back to, again, how they produce rotation, as we discussed this morning, it's really avoiding those dominant movements. So he's quite dominant in that kind of lateral kind of flexion. Good. So come into your start position again for me. Second. with a club. Just kind of take that start position, but in this occasion now, avoid that shoulder ever touching that grip. So hands and arms across rib cage, right hand on your tummy. So as you rotate back, so whatever, you're good, so this is challenging. Whatever space you have in that bottom rib to the top of the pelvis, whatever space you have here, as you rotate through backswing, avoid that space shortening. So whatever space you have here, you got it. Good. Just come into your start position again. Hand in hand. Hand on tummy. Good. Into your start position. Just live there for a few seconds. Different? In what way? But is it what you'd perhaps encourage him to do? So you kind of take the view, you always goes back to, we said about learning to the guys, and you always give a chance someone to explore and play in. But at what point do you, as the coach, go, let me just give you a bit of help now? So that's a call you've got to make, perhaps, from the idea of knowledge and know-how again. We've got this knowledge around us, but how do you kind of use it? I think it's quite evident in his case. It was a bit sticky. So just by sometimes I know it's challenging in the current environment being that hands-on, just give him a bit of guidance. Oh, that's different. So that's the kind of knowledge and know-how debate we always have. At what point do you just provide some help? Yes, sir.
Started with me gripping the club like this, and I want it to be like this. So it's more like a visual for me that grip is fine, even though the club face closes. It's more like a trigger. I do this a few times, then I go. So there's no like, there's no reason. There's no reason other than it being a trigger.
But you go back to two very powerful words he used there. If anyone detected the two words which are really revealing again. I started like this. She's done it since day one, perhaps. In visual, I like to see it. So if you listen to the words, and we'll go into this a lot tomorrow in the morning in particular, the words that he uses is essentially giving me feedback how he likes to receive information. He needs to see it, and I've done it since day one. That's some pretty kind of powerful beliefs there. So this is where maybe if there was a mirror, I know there's mirrors here, but they're not really usable today. Just having you do this in front of the mirror, perhaps, Markus, would be more helpful than moving the old way, moving the new way, and when you move that way, what's different? And this is where feel can be a very unreliable reference. So it's almost like we're kind of inherently coded. What does it feel like? Well, you make the assumption he feels it. Based on everything you said, that he needs to see what he does. So you can maybe take the approach, feel looks like what? What does feel look like in the mirror? That's different. So if you listen very carefully to the words they use, they really kind of give you a lot of very powerful bits of feedback. Okay, so there's no point doing, say, feel-based stuff or some of the feedback devices. Let's just go to the mirror, and when you move well, what's different? Always is a long time in life, isn't it? The Ice Age was there once. So just listen to the words, very powerful. Recently, yeah. The last million years, yeah. No, I'm a pain in the ass to listen to things, so you've got a whole more on this tomorrow, so apologies, guys, for this. But words are so revealing of what people are thinking and feeling. Sorry, Markus, you carry on.
Yeah, that's what I have been doing. Always.
Yeah.
Like the way I improve
absolutely right. I mean, that, again, not like that, but you can detect that very quickly, even in, I know you and I met obviously back in March, but it's still kind of, it's a new experience today. You really extract this very carefully, very clearly, just by listening to what words they play with, which we'll spend the time on tomorrow. Okay, so just to kind of finish on this, I think for me, it goes back to our discussion, David, earlier on, that it's all very core, this, and yes, he's got great sequencing, so would be my response, and it doesn't mean a great deal when clearly there's areas that Markus can really improve, which are absolutely rightly so connects back to your observation. And then equally so, there's values that aren't that great, so let's go figure out then why they're not displaying well. All this does, it doesn't matter if it's force plate, launch monitor, motion capture, stats, any numerical reference system. It just allows a better discussion. Let's go and really understand now through all the data that we have here why they do this. And hopefully, I know Yusi's not here today, but the guys that were in the room back in March, I can't recall ever showing a player data once. It was about the discussion, about playing with the awareness of movement. At least I hope it was that back when we did the sessions back in, which feels like years ago now. The idea of showing that for me is just, nah, no chance. Nor do I, but yeah. If you got a guy in front of a mirror pitching, and I guess how would I really evolve this next more for you now? Lots of pitching-based work. I think pitching's great for most things. I think pitching reveals much about most things in life. But pitching from a 6-iron setup, so that kind of mid-iron start position, but lots of kind of small pitches from a 6-iron, just to then really evolve to that kind of approach. So just to kind of finish on, let's go back to those really horrible feet. And then let that rib cage shift over here for me, elevate that shoulder. Yeah, habitual. Natural is how Mum made you. Natural as Mum goes, there's this beautiful boy called Markus. That's natural. The rest of life is habitual. You just adapt. True? You just have it. Oh, sorry, Markus, I was talking to myself then. Go into that really kind of compressed kind of shift over here and good flat feet and left shoulder up. Good arms across rib cage. Make a few rotations from there. Challenging. Yeah. It is good. So to win the Open Championship, then what needs to happen? Yeah, so how are we going to play better? What? So I don't want you to think, Markus. I want you to know, not think. We need you to know what you need to do, not think what you need to do. Audiences are good for golf. It means you're playing well, but you've got to get into that. We need to know what needs to improve, not, well, I think I need to do that. I'm not paid to think, I'm paid to know the answer.
Yeah. Well, I have to putt better. Yeah. I have to drive better. Yeah. And improve to be an all-around better player. Really, there's like no shortcut. You get the hours in.
But I think it really starts, I think a great place to start, again, it just goes back to standing great. I think when we get him standing well, I think you're a good player. I'd say that, I'm teasing you there, so he's a good player. I think for me, when we get him standing better, long neck, wide rib cage, kind of tripod feet, pretty much what we discussed today in a great way, Markus. So thank you for being so good at this. And then just some concepts of which we'll spend a lot of time around tomorrow and really how we learn how to move. He'll be absolutely fine. But it's just maybe the concept of movement, the start position, and all of that stuff. I know it's the laptop's gone into sleep mode. I think we'll just start to dissolve itself. Any questions on that? And if you watch me do 1,000 sessions, probably 900 would be just getting the guy standing great. Because it all goes back to, I get they want to look at impact, and especially good players. Oh, impact, I'm doing this. And the way in which the brain kind of logs movement, it does it in a very kind of, what we call a very, the English word is hierarchy, kind of order. So whatever you do last is what you remember first within movement. So not unusually, the last move you make is the first one you go, oh, why did I do that at impact? Because it's the last log we have in that system. And I get that, but it all goes back to what you and I do through here is just in response to how we kind of stand through here. Sorry, yes.
From now on, in the future, if he continues doing that, does it get him back to the posture he used to be, or would you recommend get rid of that, or
It's only, this is nothing more than a, you can pop your shoes. I'm sorry, Marcus. Thank you, by the way.
how to make a change?
You could, or how to make an improvement. Which one? They're very different. Let's change nothing but improve everything. You could kind of start, so you could look at it both ways. Is it the way he stood over life that's made him stand that way, possibly? Or is it that he knows I'm over here, so how do I put my hands in the club? I need to do this. There's relevance in both. You kind of take that very global discussion. Is it golf which has made him stand this way? Or is it the way he stood has made him play golf that way? In some ways, you don't really need to know the answer to that question. But I think you're absolutely right. I'd be curious then that how he can now pop his hands on the club, but he doesn't have to then go. But it goes back to day one, yeah. It goes back to day one. And he's such a good player, such a bright boy. Okay, that's all that. Yeah, that kind of all needs to work in. It's probably the way he's moved around that start position. I think with Marcus, based on the minimal experience, I think just by getting him to stand good, I think it will just start to reduce and improve over time. Remember, movement is very need dependent. I need to do this. I think the need will just shift for him. Marcus, thank you so much. Thank you. Well done. Well done. I'll clap him. He did it.